I have governed Caldenvast for 11 years, and in all that time I have learned to trust my wolves above my own counsel. They read a man's character before he opens his mouth. They know a lie before it is spoken. They have turned away lords, healers, merchants, and twice a delegation carrying the seal of a neighboring king. Turned them away quietly, a wall of gray fur at the gate, until the strangers read the meaning and retreated. My pack respects them for it. I have built policy on it. So when Marin walked through the gate on a gray afternoon in late autumn, her mending pack strapped to her back and her boots wet to the ankle from the road, and every wolf in the yard moved toward her at once, not slowly, not cautiously, but as though they had been waiting. I should have understood immediately what that meant. I told myself I did not. She was a traveling cloth mender. She had a commission from my steward's wife. 3 sets of heavy wool curtains, frayed at the hems, needing a careful hand. My steward had sent word ahead. It was a legitimate arrangement. The wolves pressing their heads against her knees before she'd set her pack down. That, I told myself, was simply because she moved quietly and smelled of pine resin and dried herbs. 2 things the wolves had always found calming. It meant nothing beyond that. I watched from the upper walkway, noted it, and went back to my correspondence. That was the first morning. By the 3rd morning, Leth, my oldest wolf, gray-muzzled and imperious, who had not voluntarily approached a stranger in the 3 years since my former second, had betrayed the pack and broken something in all of us. Leth was sleeping across Marin's threshold. I came to the hall before first light, as I always do, and found half my wolves already there, arranged around the workroom where she sat with a candle and a frame, pulling careful thread through the heavy wool. She hadn't asked them in. The door had simply been open, and they had come, and she had let them stay. She was speaking to one of the younger ones in a low, unhurried voice, not baby talk, not the strained brightness people use when they are afraid and trying not to show it. Just talking, telling the wolf, as far as I could hear, that the color of the curtain wool reminded her of a river she had crossed 2 weeks prior, and that the river had been louder than she expected, and that she hadn't minded. The wolf's tail moved slowly, back and forth in the candlelight. I went back to my study. I signed 7 letters and retained nothing of what I wrote. She was meant to finish the commission in 4 days. The 4th day came, and my steward's wife found 3 additional pieces she had been meaning to have done: a tablecloth, a formal hanging, a set of summer weight panels stored too long and gone fragile at the edges. Marin agreed without fuss. I approved the extension without being asked, which I noticed only afterward, sitting at my desk wondering why I had done it. My wolves could not be in 2 places at once, and yet they managed it, half with her in the workroom through the morning, half ranging the perimeter of the hold as they always did, and then a rotation in the afternoon, so that she was never without at least 3 of them nearby. I had never seen them organize themselves this way for anything other than a threat. And this was not a threat. It was a woman mending cloth by candlelight. And they treated the arrangement with the same grave attention. I began to find reasons to cross the hall. I told myself it was the steward's accounts, which needed a second eye. I told myself it was the condition of the eastern wall, which I could see from the hall's far window. I told myself it was simply the route I happened to take between my study and the watchtower, and the fact that I slowed to something close to a stop each time I passed the open workroom door, that was nothing. That was a man walking in a cold corridor, pausing for warmth. She never asked me to stay. She never spoke first. But she had a quality of stillness that did not make silence feel like distance. And on the 5th afternoon, I stopped walking and leaned against the doorframe and said, without planning to, that the formal hanging she was working on had belonged to my mother. She looked up. She didn't say she was sorry, the way most people did, that reflexive condolence that fills a room and means nothing. She said, "Is the pattern hers or the hold's?" "Hers," I said. "She designed it herself. The wolves in the border are not the pack's wolves. They're her wolves. The ones she kept in the yard when she was a girl, before she came here." Marin looked back at the hanging for a moment. Then she said, "I'll be careful with them," and went back to her work. I stayed in the doorway longer than I meant to. The mark on my wrist had been there since my 17th year, the way such marks are. The moon gift, the bond seal, waiting for its match. I had stopped thinking about it. 11 years of governance had made me practical, and a mark that had stayed quiet through 11 years of women brought before me by a well-meaning council seemed likely to stay quiet. I had accepted that. On the 8th evening it warmed, not blazed, not the way the old stories describe it, fire and certainty, and the world rearranging itself in an instant. Just warmth. A slow settling, like an ember that had been banked low for years, finally finding air. I pressed my palm flat against the table and sat with it and did not let myself, Name what it was. I called for my steward that night and told him the commission was nearly done and that I would need the workroom for other purposes by the week's end and that arrangements should be made for the mender's final payment and rode south. My steward said he understood and left. I sat in the quiet and told myself I had made the right decision. By the ninth morning, I knew I had not made any decision at all. I had only postponed it. The wolves knew it before I did, which was, as I said, how it always worked with them. I came down at first light and found the yard empty of wolves. All of them. Leth, the 5 young runners. The 3 great northern greys who patrolled the perimeter without ever being asked. The 2 old females who had pupped in the east wing and still governed it with quiet authority. All of them were sitting at Marin's door. Not lying. Sitting. Upright, attentive. Every one of them facing the door, as though they had been placed by a hand that knew what it was doing. I stood in the middle of the yard in the cold morning air and looked at them. The lantern above her door was still burning from the night. None of the wolves looked at me. They were not dramatic about it. They simply would not move. As I crossed the yard, I meant to call them off. I meant to speak a word, low and certain the way they understood, the way I had governed them for 11 years, and have them rise and scatter to their posts and let me restore the order I had decided on. That was what I meant to do. I reached the door, and the wolves shifted to make a path for me, and I lifted my hand to knock. And I stood there. The warmth in my wrist had become something else. Not pain, nothing like pain. The word that came to me standing at her door with my knuckles raised and my wolves waiting in a patient semicircle behind me was recognition, as though something that had been running a long calculation in the back of my chest had simply arrived at its answer and set the work down. I had watched her for 9 days. I had watched her speak to my oldest wolf about a river. I had watched her handle my mother's hanging with more care than I had managed in 11 years of walking past it. I had watched her sit in a cold hall at 5 in the morning because the light was better, and the wolves were good company, and not seem to find anything remarkable about that. I had watched her and told myself I was watching out of governance, out of due diligence, out of nothing in particular. My wolves had known from the first afternoon what I had spent 9 days refusing to name. I knocked. She opened the door in the gray morning light, her hair loose, a half-folded length of wool under one arm. She looked at me, and then at the wolves arranged behind me, and something in her expression shifted. Not surprise, exactly. More like a woman who has been waiting for a particular conversation and is deciding whether to make it easy. "You're here early," she said. "I was going to send you south," I said. "Today, I had arranged it." "I know," she said. "Your steward told me last night. I'm not going to." She looked at me for a moment. The wolves behind me were entirely silent. Leth, I was aware, had pressed his nose briefly to the back of my knee and then withdrawn. "Why?" she said. I showed her my wrist. The mark was visible in the lantern light, warmer than it had been in 11 years. The old lines of it almost luminous in the cold air. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at me. "I don't know what comes next," I said. "I'm not going to tell you what it means for you. That's yours to decide. I'm telling you that I know what it means for me, and that I should have said it sooner, and that I am sorry for the days I spent urging reasons not to." Marin was quiet. The lantern swayed slightly in the morning wind. One of the young wolves made a small sound. Not quite a whine, more like a held breath releasing. Then she said, "All right." Not agreement, not surrender, just the word itself, quiet and self-possessed, the way she did everything, as though she had heard what I said and found it true enough to stand on. The bond blazed. Not slowly this time, fully, all at once, both wrists in the lantern light gold and certain, and I felt it settle into place the way a stone settles into a wall it was cut to fit. Marin drew a short breath and looked down at her wrist and then back at me, and her expression was the same she had given the wolf in the hall on the 3rd morning. Not afraid, not overwhelmed, simply attending. The wolves knew before I did, I told her. They usually do, she said. I brought her before the assembled pack at first light, with the morning coming gray gold over the pine line in the Hold's yard full and still. I named her, not as a prize, not as a resolution, but as the plain truth, that the bond had found what it was always looking for, and that Caldenvast would know her as its Luna, and that I would not waste another morning, pretending I had not already understood. The pack inclined their heads, one by one, the way they do when something is simply correct and does not need argument. Leth sat between us the entire time, his gray muzzle tipped up, his old eyes satisfied. I have learned in the years since that Marin does not need the story told the way I've told it here. The 9 days of deliberate blindness, the wolves' patience, the mark I spent years ignoring. She knows all of it. She has never asked me to account for it. What she did ask, once, much later, sitting by the fire with Leth's head in her lap, was whether I thought the wolves had arranged it on purpose. I told her I thought they had always known, and that known and arranged might be the same thing, depending on how patient you were willing to be. She smiled at the fire, and her hand moved through Leth's fur, and outside the hold the pine stood dark against a winter sky. That, more than any ceremony, is what I carry. Not the blazing of the mark, though I am grateful for that. Not the pack's acknowledgement, though it mattered. This that in the end, the wolves had simply named what was true and waited for me to catch up, and never for a moment doubted that I would.